Requiem, turn the car. It's my car anyway. Turn it around. I can
Cam,
take her.
Cam,
I've got this.
Cam, she took a bite out of your arm. Like, we maybe need to go to the hospital.
The hospital is probably haunted anyway. I've totally got this. I've had worse.
Look, the computers. I turned on the computer. Let's do a podcast instead. Like, I let that go on a little longer than I should have. I just, I love hags.
I mean, we did kind of end things in the middle of an episode there, and like we
No,
do kind of need more content. Like, I don't want to let the Wednesday thing go.
yeah,
Okay, yeah,
content.
yeah.
Let's make some content.
Let's do a podcast.
Let's monetize our brand.
I like monetizing things, and getting subscribers. Okay. Hello, Internet. My name is Chamomile.
And I'm Requiem. Would you like some gingerbread, chamomile?
I think I'm good.
More for me, I guess. So we're in a hospital.
Yes. Now we could pick our way through the fucking obstacle course that is this hospital, but let's just go ahead and fully embrace the power of the console here. Yeah, here we are. Much easier. Yeah, due to technical difficulties, we did kind of miss the conversation with the Nagaraja down there, but there wasn't a whole lot that we missed. There's the Nagaraja down there is a type of vampire, one of those obscure vampire bloodlines. As we've discussed earlier, they nailed themselves to 13 vampire clans, and then when they had more vampire type ideas after that, including a lot of the more interesting and creative ones like the Nagaraja, they kind of had to have them be spin-off bloodlines who aren't real clans because they committed themselves to 13 and they already had 13.
Well, Mike, the other thing you get into is they're really trying to slot something that is not a vampire at all into the category of vampire. Like,
It is true.
It is a very flexible category, like we've talked about in like the first episode, and you nailed it. But Naga you're kind of outside of what a vampire is.
That is true. Like, trying to say that it's a Naga is pretty off base. But the idea of a vampire that needs to consume not just the blood but the flesh is an interesting one.
Yeah,
particularly if they are otherwise very similar to vampires, which the old World of Darkness Nagaraja is, which makes them very dissimilar to Naga, which is a whole problem unto itself. But
like, there are a couple of things you could have done there. You could have like tried to coin a name, which is admittedly pretty hit or miss, as we talked about. But you could also there are like mythological creatures that there's plenty of flesh eaters. Like, you could have it be a ghoul of some type, and use the actual Arabic spelling. Well, I guess not Arabic, but the more closely transliterated spelling, or there's a
the Arabic spelling is actually in the Arabic language.
Yeah, there's a quasi-vampire in India that some people think been the original origin of the vampire myth, like before it entered the Slavic world, the Vatala. I don't know if they're really flesh eaters, but I think there's plenty of cannibal monsters that you could have had be your cannibal vampire.
Right.
I do like that it's not European.
I haven't looked into the origins of the vampire at all, but I do know that there is this movement to say that everything secretly comes from India. Is that it is sort of this monomyth idea that all culture and mythology springs from India somehow.
I know that was a big thing back in the late 1800s with the discovery of the Indo-European culture, the connections between most European languages and most Indian languages were part of the same language family, and so there's the idea there was this proto-culture somewhere in the Eurasian steppes that gave birth to all these different cultures.
Right.
I don't know, I've seen it mentioned a couple times, but I've never seen explained why the Vitala would definitely be the origin, so I have no idea like what the basis for that is, but it is
And neither
something
do I.
there.
Like, it could be a totally legit thing, but it falls into that genre of, you know, all European culture is secretly from India, which is just, there is some level of connection there, it seems, but that's so drastically overstating it that so yeah, just makes me instantly skeptical of any, particularly because vampires, most cultures have some kind of vampire monster.
The ladies call me, oh God, but you can call me.
Yeah, but you get the thing where like,
because there's more.
Like, you can talk about vampires sort of like an archetypal category, but as like an actual sort of like thing of folklore, you kind of have to trace it back to a specific thing. Like, you'll get like a vampire encyclopedia and they'll have stuff listed all over the world, but a lot of these are not related to the original like Slavic origin of what we think of as a vampire.
Nah, that's what I like.
Not that I know anything about vampires or have done any research at all for this podcast. I've not read like 5 textbooks for this podcast at any point.
I mean, if you want to get into it, now is the time, because we're just doing a whole bunch of like criminal underworld stuff for this episode, mainly because I want to get the guns from this guy. This guy's Fat Larry, who is a pretty cool character. I like him. He's a very good salesman. I like his pitch, and I respect that.
As I just said, I don't know anything about vampires. I can't talk about them.
Well,
I did
that's
no
unfortunate.
research.
Okay, then we'll just sit here in silence for the next 30 minutes while we do criminal stuff.
I mean, where would you, if you were to like, off the top of your head, think of like, where did the idea of a vampire come from? What would you say?
Well, what I had heard, and I don't know if this is actually accurate, this is one of those situations where it's like, you're asking, so I'm answering, but
Say now, Wonder Girl.
What I have heard is that it comes from bodies due to bloating. They can look like they're more well-fed after being buried than they were when they were alive, and that also that the receding of the skin from like the fingernails and the hair can make it look like their hair has grown and their fingernails have grown compared to when they were alive, which sort of suggested to, you know, Eastern European peasants in like the 12th century or whenever it was, that, you know, this body is still growing hair and is feeding on something, which at some point became that they are feeding on blood and causing all kinds of terrible magical plague and stuff. Topically, we are going to be dealing with the vampire plague at some point in the near future, although I think it will mainly be getting into that in the next episode.
Oh, fun. But, like, why would you have dug up the grave in the first place is the question. Because that is, like, that is a legitimate theory in folklore studies that people dug up these graves and did not understand how decomposition worked. But you then get into the question of, like, well, why did they go dig up a grave in the first place?
Well, I assume they were playing Wake the Dead. Like, you know, you're having some kind of family celebration, you know, like it's Halloween or Thanksgiving or whatever, and, you know, they wouldn't specifically have celebrated Thanksgiving because this was before that holiday even existed, let alone was at all known in Europe, which, you know, is obviously European awareness of Thanksgiving is very recent because from globalized culture, but you know,
I'm pretty
even now
sure
it's not really observed.
The United States and its culture has existed throughout time, hasn't it?
I mean, some people sure seem to think so, but I'm skeptical of that theory. But yeah, you know, whatever family celebration you're getting to, you know, they still had holidays. Whenever holiday you're celebrating, you know, you would go out to the family's ancestral plot, and you would start digging up coffins, and you would knock on the coffin, and if you got a knock back, that means that the person buried in there wanted to join in the celebration, and so you would invite them out. It's, you know, it's something you would go send the kids to do with, like, you know, their fun uncle or whatever, you know, whoever is watching the kids that day. Which I don't know exactly how long that tradition has been around, but it definitely, you know, it feels like something that's pretty old to me.
Yeah,
Yo, I need a
well, like, so imagine you're a peasant in Eastern Europe, and, you know, like, bad stuff starts happening to you, like,
still with me?
the weather goes bad, so your crops fail, maybe your livestock all get some sort of illness, maybe some of your children die of a disease. What is your explanation for that, and what can you do about it?
Now,
Well,
I can't tell you what they is
my first
exchanging,
assumption is that
but
I'm
let's
probably
just
under
say
some kind
a
of
certain client of
supernatural
mine is
curse.
ready to drop some
Probably because
uncircumcised
my
bucks to
podcast
acquire what's in
co-host
briefcase
has
number
offended
one.
Fortuna, the
You
goddess
get
of
it
luck,
for me.
and that
not
I'm
only
sort of
give
like
you
getting
crack,
splash
but
damage
I'll
from that
roll out
curse
my
for
special
associating with him.
stock as well.
That seems very
Now, how that
specific.
sound?
Like, I don't know, like where this example is coming from.
Well, I mean, okay, let's just call it a curse in general then. Is that broader? Is that
Yo, baby, why
I
you
mean,
gotta shake me down like
yeah.
that?
So like,
If I hadn't just got
you
my
would
foot
attribute
out
some
of
sort of
gas, I'd do
supernatural
it
origin to
myself,
it,
but
potentially,
now
right?
it's got to be that way. Fine, you got a discount. But
Because you
only
live
after I
you live
hit
in a
the
pre-scientific
briefcase.
world. You don't have explanations for things. You don't know
Yeah,
about
that's what I like to
bacteria, so
hear.
you cannot explain
Now,
why
if
disease
you're the
happens.
straight out
You don't know
hardboiled Terminator type,
understand
I'd
meteorology. You don't
suggest
know
you buy
why
some
the
heavy
weather is the way it
firepower when
is.
you roll up to the parking
Uh,
garage.
so like we talked about back in Kingmaker with the wind being described as a harpy snatching stuff away. Like you might come up with a supernatural explanation for stuff.
you called that Kingmaker? I assume meant Kingdom Hearts, but yes.
I'm pretty sure those are the same thing, aren't they?
I mean, basically. But
Or
yeah, just
travel
because
to Disney World to forge a kingdom out of the Magic Kingdom.
I want that game. But yeah, just because that is on a previous game, just to explain that concept again, there was in ancient Greece, harpies were spirits of the sea winds, and so if you are an ancient Greek and you are standing on a ship and the wind kicks up and blows something valuable out of your hands and into the sea, then you would say that the harpies had snatched it from your hand with their invisible talons, and that's just sort of an example of anthropomorphizing a misfortune that can occur to you, because we as humans, we like to have someone to blame. So for things that are clearly just the random chaos of the universe, even the Greeks understood that winds are unpredictable sometimes. Like that's not a hard concept to wrap your head around, but they nevertheless, like all humans, they want someone to blame when something like that goes wrong, and so they invent the harpies, and that is the origin of the harpy myth. Obviously, by the time you get it in like the Odyssey and stuff, it's developed a little bit, but for
So like you want
people who
something
have
to
seen the
blame.
Kingdom Hearts, that's I hope that was a fun bit of nostalgia, since this is like the second time that I've explained this. But yeah, please go on with actual new content.
So like you want something to blame, and oh god, you want something to blame, and like this is something that has happened in various places in the world. In Western Europe, what they ended up blaming a lot was the witch. So like, because the explanation, especially in the Protestant world, is like, well, if bad things are happening to you, it's because you're not pious enough and you need to pray more, which is not a very satisfying explanation, particularly if like you might be a perfectly pious person, but they also had this belief in the witch, so you could blame this on witches, and eventually it turned into this whole thing that where you had witch panics all throughout Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, this is an idea that comes up in Cotula's upgraded her outfit.
Yeah, I was gonna wait to talk about this until at the end, but since we've already had a little break here, this outfit is, I think, a little bit appropriative. I don't know if this is actually a Native American thing or not. I both lack the relevant expertise, and it's not super high resolution, but I do, in general, I like what it does with her silhouette. This feels like the kind of outfit that someone who has just blown up a warehouse would switch to. It is a very 2004 outfit, with all the leather and the fangs and stuff. I do think it is trying to be a Native American thing, but other than that issue, which I grant you, especially if our viewer is specifically a Native American, saying other than that issue is, kind of a dick move, but I'm just commenting on the outfit as a whole and not just its... And it's again, like, I feel really weird talking about this because this feels like it's probably appropriative, but I actually don't know enough about Native American cultures to know, so I'm really groping around in the dark for this part of the game. Basically what I'm saying here is that if this is an appropriative outfit, then I get that is a problem. But I don't even know for sure if it is.
Yeah.
But it is. It feels like the kind of thing. It's rather than this floor-length skirt, this is something that you can run and gun in. There's something where whereas previously, Cotula always had that sort of that look with the with her little pea shooter, the sort of the Wild West look, where this someone who didn't really look like they were dressed for a fight at all, nevertheless pulls out a pistol and starts swinging around because everyone has a revolver in the Wild West. Whereas with this, we pull out a gun and I absolutely I buy this that she still has definitely not a criminal or military style to her, but it feels like she picked out her outfit based on the idea that she might get into a gunfight.
Yeah.
Which, and it still seems sorceress, in a way. The next outfit is much better for that. The outfit we'll get in Hollywood, but it feels like a natural progression of from someone who is interested in the occult to someone who is fighting a shadow war as an occultist. And relevantly, we are about to get into a hell of a gunfight.
So I guess I will continue talking about the vampire origin.
Yeah, because, we're just going to chew through 15 guys real quick. This is going to take us 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, so in Western Europe you get the witch. It's a way to essentially take the evil happening in a community and place it on a scapegoat and then eliminate that scapegoat. And unfortunately in Western Europe that ended up falling on real people. And as some folklorists have noted, the vampire ends up being kind of the alternative to the witch, where you, instead of placing that on a living person, you place it on a corpse. Because Eastern Europe but doesn't really have witch trials for the most part, and because you also have the vampire panics in North America, and what the folklorists have noted is that where the vampire panics happened were places where the witch trials didn't happen, and were places where instead of Puritans you had what were called dissenters, so people like Baptists, and this is also the area of New England that eventually gives you Joseph Smith. He might have been in New York, but that general area.
Upstate New York, yeah.
Upstate New York. But you get vampire panics up there, and you don't get witch trials, so it's potentially an alternative to the witch. The question I have with that, though, is I'm not positive that there's never been witch trials in the Orthodox world. Southeastern Europe at this time was dominated by the Ottomans, and it's possible that, they just didn't allow witch trials, but I've never been able to confirm that one way or the other. And the other thing is that Russia specifically, which is independent, did have witch trials. They're kind of very different from the Western European witch trials, but they're still a thing. So that there's aspects of that I question. And it also kind of directly leads into the question of why are there vampire trials, not vampire trials, but why aren't there vampire trials of living people? Because you do in folklore see the concept of a living vampire, which was a living person who is a vampire who walks among humans like a vampire conspiracy instead of being a corpse in their grave. And you do see references to witches in this southeastern European folklore, and the line between witch and vampire is very blurry. So I'm not sure entirely about that, but it is something that I've seen posited by folklorists. And it also directly leads into questions of why are vampire panics happening? Very Eastern European thing. Was I cutting out?
No. Yeah, I caught all that. I'm just focusing on the fight a little bit because the guys with the submachine guns have shown up, so...
That is fair. So I'll just keep talking about North American vampires.
Yes, please
One of
do.
the
We're
things,
like 2/3 of the way through this, so.
one of the things that that gets noted by the on the Trail of the Vampire. No, not Trail on the Trail of the Vampire. That's the book that I made up. Food for the Dead is is a folklorist researching the North American vampire panic. One thing that he notes is the actual people doing this doing these vampire slayings never refer to it as vampires. The newspapers will vampires, and they'll actually note a lot of times that the locals don't call it vampires. They're so stupid they don't know that they're trying to kill vampires. So there's
Journalists have been shitty elitists for pretty much all of history, apparently.
Yeah. So there's a question of like, why is this very Eastern European thing why has it appeared in North America? It was never a thing in Western Europe. It was never a thing in England. American culture is very derived from English culture. So, and it's not a thing in England. What has happened? And Slayers and Their Vampires puts forth a couple of possibilities. He does note, and I will also reinforce this, that this is all very speculative on his part. There's not really a good answer. One possibility is that the folklore had leaked into North American culture. The books that originally discussed the idea of the vampire had been published in North America at this time, so it's possible that it just sort of filtered in somehow. Another possibility is that, because it happens around the time of the Revolutionary War, that it was contact with the Hessian soldiers that had been used by Great Britain as mercenaries. This is a very Eastern European concept, but you have to understand that there were a lot of Germans living in Eastern Europe at the time. And so some of these mercenaries were Germans from Eastern Europe. Like, even in Dracula, it mentions that there are a lot of Saxons living in Dracula, and Saxons are Germans. So it could have been contact with the Hessians. Maybe that was some of their folklore that got filtered into the wider New England folklore. There's another possibility that this is a folk remedy for consumption that got misunderstood. Vampires are not always tied to disease, but the New England vampire panic was very tied to disease. It was always around cases of consumption. So this could have been what they were doing was, so there's not, in the New England vampire panic, the corpses are not necessarily coming out of their graves. They're in their grave and they're feeding on people spreading consumption, but they're not leaving the grave. So it could have just been that this was a folkloric remedy for consumption, where you go and burn the heart and liver of the last person who had consumption, that the newspaper people thought was them thinking it was vampires. And there's also the possibility that it was contact with the Native Americans, that some Native American folklore filtered into New England folklore. There are a couple of Native American monsters that are kind of vampire-like, but it's really a stretch, and they're not really doing what the vampires in the New England vampire panic were said to have done.
Fun fact, I feel like at some point you were supposed to be able to remove car stereos from some of the cars in this parking garage, but they couldn't figure out how to do it. The reason I suspect this is just because there's just a car stereo lying around on the ground down here.
I thought that was going to be about vampires.
Yeah, no, sorry. That was just, happened to come up. God, those guys with the machine pistols are annoying. But yes, please do continue. Were there any other explanations? I forget what the complete list was, because we did talk about this off camera, but...
Yeah, the 4 explanations are that it's the non-fiction folklore book that got published, filtering into American folklore. It was contact with Hessian soldiers, potentially a piece of folklore that was not vampire related that got misunderstood, or that it was contact with Native Americans, but none of these are really definitive in any way.
Right. And then this comes up often in history, is that often you know, our understanding of history is really our best guess.
So like none of those explanations are perfect. They all have their issues. So that's where the famous North American vampire case, Mercy Brown, comes from. And I kind of like the idea of a vampire who is more ghostly, who kind of ethereal, like Carmilla, who is maybe coming into somebody's room at night and just sort of floating over their bed, sort of like a nightmare. And we've talked about the idea of a madness vampire. I think you could have the ghost vampire and the madness vampire linked together pretty well. You could maybe even use a word from Indo-European language like Mara, which is, we've talked about being a word for nightmare in our Kingdom Hearts Kingmaker game. Because I like the idea of sort of a more ghostly, ethereal vampire, and I think having them have the madness archetype that the Malkavians have really works well.
Yeah, if we were hypothetically making a vampire spin-off game, we would probably do that. We're not.
Hypothetically,
but
we're
yeah.
not. We're not.
Definitely not.
And you keep calling it a hypothetical vampire spin-off game, but our hypothetical game would definitely hypothetically include mummies, right?
Yeah, mummies. Those are definitely the second most popular monster that you would want to include. Even in a game focused primarily on vampires, you would want to include the mummy option. Just because otherwise you get into the gangrel where they're a shitty discount mummy. Where it's, you know, just a bone thrown to all the mummy fans, and it's really unsatisfying and dumb. Do I have to actually pick something up, or can I just... and get the briefcase undetected? We aren't running a stealth build. That was never an option. Okay, now I have to remember where I killed the guys with the briefcases. I just did so much murder down here that I lost track. Ah, there we are. But yeah, that is the first of our 2 criminal underworld related side quests.
I guess we could talk about how the vampire transferred from a creature of folklore into being a creature of literature.
People wrote literature about them?
Yeah, that basically sums it up. There's no need to talk about that any further.
I assume one of those textbooks you read was entirely dedicated to this subject. I also assume that one sentence conveys at least 30 to 40% of that textbook's contents. One thing that I have known, and I haven't read any of the specific books that Requiem is talking about here, but one thing I've noticed about a lot of nonfiction books is that it usually feels like they had about 30 pages of content, but because no one wants to buy a 30-page book, they then padded it out to 200 pages so that they could sell it as a book.
So this is primarily an Eastern European thing. It's especially a Southeastern European thing. In fact, what country does the word vampire come from, Chamomile?
I mean, I would assume Romania, but, like, I would not be surprised if that were wrong.
Yeah, you are wrong.
Hooray, I was right about being wrong.
So what would your second guess be?
I don't know, now I'm trying to remember what countries are even in the Balkans. The Federal Republic of Macedonia.
Incorrect. It's actually Serbia. One of the So at southeastern Europe at this time is pretty heavily dominated by the Ottomans, but around the late 1600s, the Austrian Russians increasingly encroach upon this area. And around the 1600s, Austria will briefly take control of Serbia. And Austria at this time is, getting into the Enlightenment. They're having more rationalist scientific explanations, and they send people into these areas they're getting control of. Also in parts of Hungary, because eventually Austria will eventually get the Austro-Hungarian Empire out of the Habsburgs. But so they're getting control of these areas that are, they're Europeans and Christians, but they were ruled by non-European, non-Christians for centuries. And they're trying to explain this folklore that they had not really had an understanding of. And Maria Teresa at one point sends a physician to, I think, Hungary, but not among Hungarians, in Silesia, and it was among German Silesians. And he comes back with this report on what is going on there. And Hungary is really interesting in general, just because it's a non-Indo-European speaking people, and it was Protestant. It's ruled by Catholics and then Muslims, and it's kind of a crossroads for a lot of stuff. But he comes back with this report of what is happening. He tries to explain it as an explanation for disease. He's like, this is how these non-enlightened peoples explain the spread of disease, which is sometimes true, but not always. Like, sometimes maybe like a vampire is essentially a poltergeist, is breaking stuff in your house, or has impregnated your wife.
Clearly, these uneducated peasants just think that diseases can do that. You appear to have broken furniture-itis, which is caused by vampires.
So eventually, a report gets published in Austria, and it filters into the rest of Western Europe. And so as it gets picked up in the, among the educated elites, they find something about this figure fascinating and start writing it into the literature. Some of the first examples of literary vampires are written in Germany. There's a poem, and there's a couple of short stories. And actually, some of the early, in English, some of the early vampires are German. Like, instead of having them be from like Romania or southeastern Europe, the writers have them be from Germany, because their first example of a vampire was from Germany. And there's an interesting thing that happens, because we're getting into the Romantic period, and Lord Byron is, the vampire folklore is a very working class figure. He's a member of the peasantry. He's just somebody in your village. Is that true? When you read a vampire novel, is the vampire used class? Requiem, Camille? I keep getting us confused. That's probably fine.
Yeah, that's kind of concerning, but usually, we can just ignore these problems until they attempt to kill us and bite our chunk of our arm off, and that tends to work itself out. So that strategy has worked for us so far.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Everything looks in order.
But yeah, no, getting into it, my favorite interpretation of the vampire, relevantly to the game, since it takes place in LA, I like the idea of the American vampire as celebrity, of someone who someone who has a cult of hangers-on who follows them around, right? Which is sort of what in Vampire the Masquerade are ghouls, people who are following you around because they're hoping to become a vampire themselves, or even just because they're hoping to get a little bit of reflected vampiric glory. Not that I would know anything about that kind of motivation. That's ridiculous. You're so silly. But the vampires live an extremely wealthy life. They have what is basically a drug addiction to blood. They're very, very glamorous. They can't be properly famous, but they do get a lot of the perks of fame. They can live in a mansion if they want. They can. They have these hangers-on who do whatever they want, and they can, for the most part, do whatever they want and get away with it because the vampire conspiracy will cover up for them. With a couple of exceptions of things that put too much strain on the vampire conspiracy, Masquerade stuff.
You're a little pale for me anyway. Say, My girl
Uh,
down at confession.
the reason,
named Venus
you know, I
Day.
could
She asked
go on
around
into
for
this,
some
but I
of
don't
them
want
skills
to spend too much time on the idea of the American vampire as
I
celebrity.
give her a call,
But the reason
recommend you if you're
why
interested.
I like this interpretation, this angle on the vampire, is because of. Well, the one more thing I should say, I feel like that's kind of critical to this interpretation. It's also, as a celebrity, you are, at the very least, peripherally aware of and engaged with like some kind of horrible dark conspiracy that destroys lives. So yeah, I really like this idea of the American vampire as the celebrity, and the reason for that is because a celebrity is like the most American version of the aristocrat.
Yep.
So yeah,
A
long
celebrity
walk
is an
towards saying
aristocrat.
that no, I do not think of vampires as a working class figure. That that conception has certainly died out in the circles that I move in, and I assume in general. But you know, I've been
Yeah.
wrong before, so
The literary vampire is. I mean, I'm certain there are counterexamples of this, but for the most part, the literary vampire is some sort of upper class person. Uh, in The Vampire, written by Polidori, the vampire character is very blatantly inspired by Lord Byron. Lord Ruthven is sort of this rootless aristocrat, and then
who doesn't know how
Dracula
to
is
pronounce
a.
Spanish names? Lord Byron has now been ruined for me forever.
Dracula is, you know, a boyar in Transylvania. Like, even like, you know, Edward Cullen is some sort of, you know, he's some sort of rich kid. Louis and Lestat
ambiguously
are
wealthy.
Louis owns a plantation in Louisiana. In True Blood, all the vampires come off as like rich. Like even the one who is not, she is only not rich because she's being asked to pay centuries of back taxes by the U.S. government.
Which is a fun concept for a post-masquerade world.
The vampire is archetypally an aristocrat, and like, you know, the romantics are happening, so Lord Byron is used as a sort of as the basis for a vampire, essentially. People actually used to think that because originally the vampire was published anonymously, so people immediately assumed that this was written by Lord Byron. And Polidori had to convince people, no, it was me.
Everybody comes in here, Scott.
Like if you had in effect piece of fiction a vampire who was more working class, it would feel like it's deliberately playing against type.
I am your beat priestess, and it's time to confess.
So, I don't know if you ever talked about on camera how, I think we did bring it up during the Therese and Jeanette arc, about how a lot of the, and this is again, total tangent based on what's going on in the game, I want to cover it before we move past it. I've talked about how a lot of the women in this game, the game clearly really wants them to be sexy, and they're really not. This one here is a little bit of an exception to that, where again, the game is definitely pushing her sex appeal, and yeah, she is actually kind of attractive. I like her whole beat priestess shtick. It's you know, she feels like someone who might actually want to have sex with me rather than use her sex appeal to manipulate me.
Larry? Oh, so you're the Cleopatra Jones he was going to send over? Oh,
So.
yeah. I've been waiting for someone like you to come in here.
But I'm pretty sure I interrupted something. That didn't sound like an ending when you were talking,
I need
so.
someone to inform some people that they won't be
I didn't really have
going through
anything
this
else to talk about.
intrigued yet.
So yeah, we basically just gonna slap a conclusion on that. So
Yep.
The parking lot
Fair.
next to the Empire Hotel. Couple of guys, Russian accents,
you know.
thick. I need you to tell them Venus doesn't have
Vampires
any
in literature are
presents.
aristocrats. And when the folklore was being entering into Western Europe and like people were looking at it in Western Europe from an academic perspective, it was very interesting because some of them did attempt to understand it as the peasantry in Eastern Europe metaphorically talking about like an extricative aristocracy or bureaucracy that was exploiting them, even though that's not doesn't really seem like it was any the actual basis for it. That's a Western European interpretation of an Eastern European folklore. It's really interesting how that changes it.
By the way, best addition to the patch right here, like the of all the broken glitches and bugs and cut content re-added by the patch, best thing is at the end of that conversation, there's an option where you can ask the club owner here to get rid of this annoying turnstile, and if you pick that option, when you come back, it'll be gone. You can just walk in. It's but yes. And I do the idea of the vampire as the parasitic aristocrat who is, you know, in the sort of a Marxist conception of this the vampire aristocrat as this parasite who is exploiting the labor of the working class, literally in this case sucking their blood out, and not really providing anything in return except for, you know, an aura of mystique and majesty and glamour and entrancing eyes that are simultaneously dead and more alive than any I've ever seen. What was I talking about?
Stop talking about Fame Requiem!
I mean, I'll admit that I've been kind of hoping to get in touch with him. Like, I've been meaning to run this by... Like, I know you're gonna object, but, like... Man, have you seen the shit we're dealing with? Like, there was the motel, which... And I'll admit, that went wrong. And I helped with the spiders, so I hope we can get past that.
We're never getting our luggage back.
Fair, but, I mean... You kind of walked me right into Mother Sorrow, so I feel like we're even on that. Speaking of which, have there always been hags in Texas?
I mean, as far as I know, yes.
And we've been on the road for like how many weeks now? Like, the interstate system is pretty straightforward. I don't know how we could possibly have failed to get into Arkansas by now.
I am not calling Fang Requiem.
Well,
okay, stop even bringing it up. Like, are we gonna have to play a different game, or are you gonna keep bringing up Fang Requiem?
No. I mean, all right, but we're gonna have to call someone at some point, because clearly our own understanding of the supernatural is not getting us out of this place.
We'll be fine. Look, we got past Mother Sorrow. I'm sure we're just. Why did you drive us through Texas in the first place? That's not the most efficient way to get to Utah.
I feel like this is only strengthening my case in that I really couldn't tell you. Like, for some reason, when I opened up the map and started, like, plotting a route out, it was just like, oh yeah, we'll go through Texas. That just seemed like a very obvious thing to do. Even though it's really not the best way to get from Utah to Arkansas, but like, it seemed like it was part of it, you know? No, I'm skipping ahead here, aren't I? I don't need to assassinate this guy yet. I just gotta go kill some goons.
I'm sure we'll be in Texarkana by sundown. It's fine.
I mean, on that subject, has the sun set for the past 3 days?
You know, I'm not sure. We've been kind of in this weird twilight haze. It's probably just the smog. There might be smog in Texas. I don't know. You don't know. You're from Utah.
Well, I mean, I'm totally used to the smog, but, like, you know, smog or no, like, the sun still goes down, and, like, you can tell it gets darker, but, like, I do kind of feel like, you know, the sun has been setting for a while now. because like ever since we left that motel,
Look.
like it was
Look.
it was sunrise really. Well, I thought it was sunrise when we left that hotel. I figured, oh, it's dawn. The dawn looks kind of like a sunset here. I guess that could make perfect sense. It was too smoggy to really make out where the sun was exactly, so I just figured it's probably in the east rather than the west, but it still just looks like a sunset for some reason. I don't know. I don't do weather.
Send you.
Look.
And
Look.
It's Monday.
Cameo. You're not getting back together with Fang Requiem. He broke up with you, which is weird because you two weren't even dating.
I mean, maybe I broke up with him.
Then why do you want me to call him?
So that I can break up with him again.
Look, focus on the podcast and we'll monetize it. Maybe we'll monetize it so that we can get an Uber out of here.
All right. We need to set up a Patreon so that our viewer can pay for our Uber. We have determined that he is very wealthy. Or she.
I hope.
They. Whatever.
Or we might have more than one, it's possible.
It's true. We potentially have viewers plural now. There you are.
Officer, he was shooting at me first, you saw it.
To which he responds, frankly, I'm just taking an excuse to commit some violence.
And they really have big sewers in LA. Just enormous manhole covers.
Yeah, you get that sometimes in older cities that were designed in like the 1950s.
We don't know where she went. She was just down this alleyway and she vanished. There's just this slightly ajar manhole cover.
Anyway, it's been nearly 2 minutes since the last caught sight of her, so she probably doesn't exist anymore. Let's all go about our business and, not respond at all to anyone who matches her description, including her, her literally unique outfit.
It's a nice night out, huh?
By the way, did you remember what time it was when you, oh, because I didn't open up the recording on this one. You didn't happen to...
When we started,
Yeah.
I was not paying attention, I'm sorry.
I can't hear you! Let's talk in my office!
Weren't we just talking earlier? Why do you have a British accent now?
Oh, she's always had a British accent.
Oh, I just didn't notice it.
Oh, hang on. What's my seduction? My seduction is 4. Okay, I don't need to bump that. That's enough to get some blood out of a blood doll, which I need to do on the way out.
Bouncer did. Poor dear can't turn his neck to the right anymore. Already had a call from Boris. Wasn't too happy about tonight's son of a bitch. Say, how would you like to get into the club business, Well, to start this club, I had to take out a significant loan from a king bastard by the name of Boris, and every time I haven't been able to make the monthly plus interest, the bastard takes what he feels is a suitable late fee. I've got a club to run, so I'll be blunt. I refuse to fuck that fat misogynistic old man one more time to hold on to the club. So I need someone to eliminate him. Do this, and I'll make you a silent partner. He's at the Empire Hotel. Always has a few of the fiercest bully boys standing
Cotula
around
wants to be the
trying
face of the club.
outsnare each other. He's got a short temper, and more than likely he's been drinking for the last 4 hours. Here, key to the penthouse level.
Hey, they've got people dancing in cages.
They do.
LA sure does have a lot of goth clubs, doesn't it?
So yeah, getting down from here is going to be a bit of a hassle, so so long as we're already using these dark powers, that's just there.
And you complain about us being trapped in mystical Texas.
I didn't start using the console commands until we were already deep in, alright? Figured the damage had already been done at that point. Worst case scenario, you know, the ghost of a drowned kid trapped in this video game is going to start haunting us, but, like, at this stage, that'll just be one more thing.
Look, Mother Sorrow has probably stopped chasing us by now, so...
No,
I mean, did she say whether you were delicious or not? Like, maybe you're not even her... Maybe she didn't even like you, or like how you chased it.
I mean, strictly speaking, she said I was sweet. Which... Sweet meat was, like, her exact word. She used that one before and after the attack. I realized the first couple of gunshots didn't do anything, but, like, with enough of them, like, surely at some point enough of her body has been replaced by lead that she's just physically unable to continue attacking, right? I've got
so
this.
we're probably fine. This is a nice looking hotel.
Yeah, there's some Russian mob boss hanging out here. We're gonna go whack him.
We're gonna whack him off.
That's not where I was going with that, but oh fuck. I forgot to get blood. Definitely can't do this with no blood.
That means to kill somebody, right?
I mean, we've got humanity to spare. We could. Sorry if this is too forward, miss, but you're looking very alone tonight.
She did not have a lot of blood in her. Why did she tell you to buy a watch?
I have no idea. Like, it's a fairly common bark too, and I have no idea what the point of it is. Aha, you sir, before you step out into the open where people can see you. Thank you for answering my survey. Alright, now we can whack a Russian mob boss.
Finally. Oh, do we have a submachine gun?
Yep. See, it feels like Cotula is getting pretty serious.
Do you think she's a gun nerd? Like, does she get really mad about the difference between, like, a clip and a magazine?
There we go. I could see it. No, oh god. Alright. Fine. Ordinarily, you know, there's lots of ways through these places, but it does look like I am going to have to... Can't just go guns blazing on this one. I have to be a bit of a sneak, and then I can blaze my guns.
starting
Oh wow. My god, in the world of darkness, a polite person? Okay, so if these are in floor order, then yeah. Need something for the Buffalo Suite. Passwords on this are wealth and power, so we're in that kind of hotel.
Oh boy.
He's watching Planet La Femme on the pay-per-view.
That means something
Lobster.
woman. Right?
Planet of the Women, I assume.
So it's a science fiction movie.
Yeah. Technically.
Yes? May I help you?
It's like a fun for the whole family type movie, right?
I mean, it depends on your family. Definitely not mine, but not mine or yours, but maybe someone's. Okay, how do I get past? God dang, it's weird that they're choking me at this door here. Especially since the lockpicking difficulty on this is so high that I'm clearly not meant to be able to lockpick it. You know, the lockpicks in this place don't go higher than 5 or 6. Ah, here we go. Oh, yeah, I guess they do go up to 7. How high is my laughing? Laughing is 5, so I can totally pick this one with blood buff. And let's get another dot in perception. That'll increase my ability to shoot people.
Makes sense. Is the game moving? Oh, it just is now.
Yeah,
The
I am,
newscasters are just talking about our various.
that was very noisy. Like, what was that noise? All we did was jump down onto like a little office chair.
Oh, good. It's a dark hallway.
I believe that's actually a closet. So, hey there, buddy.
What if I want another knife?
It's a weird thing. I think I'm pretty sure I talked about this on camera about how you can
Yeah, you
in
did.
fact, yeah, you can
You
in
did.
fact ferry the weapons back and forth. So, what if we do want another knife?
For such a nice hotel, there's some really ugly staff.
Hasta navis. Who the hell are you? You give me message, I take to him. Yaponimayov. Very well. Follow me.
That worked.
I'm just real persuasive, I guess.
Zайди. Черт возьми. Что это такое? Черт возьми. Почему дуешь вы пустые?
We don't understand him, but they are telling us what he's saying in Russian. Like, we're not like the archivists and we can just understand languages. They just decided to.
You want Dima to leave? Why would I allow that?
Because my text is blue.
Иди тогда, Дима. Very well. Happy? Now spit it out. Make this quickly.
I'd like to kiss you on the neck.
Linkaya Svolach, stupid, spoiled American child. So much, she spits in my face. You will get nothing from me. Go tell that bitch she can pack up Little Club. Her name is coming off. Get the hell out of here. Pashli, go.
Okay, no, I don't need to threaten this guy. I actually want him to think I'm okay so I can get into blood drinking distance, but fine, we're doing it this way instead.
I guess you're just gonna let him shoot at you?
I mean, he's not doing a whole lot of damage, so... I'm evidently not the only one who can just, you know, take a couple of gunshots straight to the face, no problem. I had to pump, what, 4 shotgun rounds into him?
Hey, you got a fancy ring.
Yeah, he's got some sweet stuff that I'm it'll take from him. You know, unfortunately, since I was unable to just go and bite him like I wanted to, I am now going to have to shoot my way out of here. Just kind of hoping to ambush bite more of these guys on the way in. Luckily, I have an automatic weapon now. So,
Do you think when Cotula gets home, she just pulls the bullets out of her body?
It's funny you should mention I've written vampire stories where, like, they do in fact have to do that.
I'll bet she has a collection.
Which I find that's like I find that really increases, like, the verisimilitude of the thing. Like, I really like those scenes where vampires have to do that. You know, they come home and they are just full of bullets that they have to wrench out with pliers. And, you know, it's a good contrast when, you know, they go through and they tear through all these guys with their vampire superpowers and their immortal flesh. And then, you know, they get back and they just have to go digging around in themselves with pliers for half an hour getting them all out. Yeah, as I've mentioned before with the outfit, and it really helps when she's carrying the submachine gun around. It does feel like, you know, ever since blowing up that warehouse, Cotula is no longer that shy nerd girl who, you know, who's
Assistant manager of Barnes Noble.
yeah, assistant manager of Barnes & Noble, and whose idea of a sexy outfit for the club was a floor-length skirt with a little bit of belly showing.
This is still...
So, you know, not to say that she's showing a whole lot more skin, but it's more like she's realized that's not really who she is, and she's not trying to play into that anymore.
She's like, maybe I am, maybe I'm actually lawful neutral. Should I turn to the dark side? It's like, man. So like, now that I look back at it, you know, the signs were always there. I always was a bit of a rules lawyer.
And, like, I can totally see her, like, kind of saying this half sarcastically to herself. Like, and just, like, kind of marveling that this kind of thing, like, the idea that she was lawful good, that this was, like, an important distinction to her at one point. Like, she actually hung a bit of her identity on that. And, like, you know, now that she's legitimately killed, like, 20 people, that seems kind of ridiculous to her. But also, she still kind of likes it.
she's still like a giant nerd. She's trying to organize it.
It's
with
like,
the
yeah,
rest
like,
of the Tremere.
she's saying it
But she's like,
ironically now.
She's like, guys, we can't all play wizards.
Like, she's saying it ironically now, but she does still, like, call herself lawful. Like, she's lawful, and she says she's undecided on the good and evil axis these days.
Guys, we can't all play wizards.
Right, yeah, like, you know, she tries to organize a D&D game with the Tremere.
There you are.
There
Finished
is, like, I'm 50-50 on whether or not this character is going to be in a hypothetical Master Nosferatu game. As, like, an iconic character of some kind.
yet? What? Yeah, I can't hear you. Let's talk in my office.
Fortunately, this is the last time we'll have to go and talk in her office, because that place is... It's annoying to transition there via cutscene, and it's annoying to get back down.
Boris? Is that Boris's blood? Guess we're partners.
Actually,
then.
no.
No.
I killed him from a pretty far
I've
distance
tried
away.
over the years to keep this place open. Tell you what, partner. Come in every few days and I'll give you your cut. Here's tonight. I've got some money to make us. I'll hold your share of the profits. Don't forget to drop by and scoop them up once in a while, hmm?
So now every time we complete a main plot quest, we can come back to her for more money.
Nice.
So yeah, which is why it's important to get this side quest done before you do the main plot,